Yeah. Not like everybody's there yet.
I've got a few more to admit. So today, whilst we're waiting for some others to join on, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for taking the time out to join this session. I'd like this to be quite an open discussion. We'll obviously introduce you to the panellists in a short while, but really it's sort of your contributions and what questions that you have for us as well. It'd be great if everyone could turn the cameras on if you feel comfortable with that, but then for the time being, keep your microphones off because background noise can get in the way. And then as and when we have the questions, you can unmute yourself. You can either give me a little wave, I'll be keeping my eye on everyone, or there is actually a reaction, so you can do like a thumbs up like that if you want to ask a question. And I think it's best if everybody is in the gallery view. So if you've not, and you can only see sort of me as your main screen, if you hover over the top right-hand corner, you'll see it says gallery view, and switch to that, and then you can see all the panellists and the attendees as well. Just got a couple more people to admit. So I think we'll get started at 5 past, and if people join on a bit after that, I can still admit them. For those of you who've just joined now, we're just waiting for a few more participants to see if anyone else joins on. Wait a couple of minutes. Okay, well, there's no one else in the waiting room, so I'll get started. If you didn't hear me before, I said about putting, if you've just joined on, sorry, I said about putting the gallery view on so you can kind of see everyone, and I really want this to be quite a contributed discussion. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to just pass you over to Sean, because this is a Pro Manchester members event, and the Juice Academy are members of Pro Manchester. So Sean's going to do a quick introduction before we come back to me and I introduce you to the panellists. To you, Sean.
Hi everyone, good afternoon. Thanks for joining today's session, and thanks to Georgia. So I'm Sean Gibb and I'm the Events and Marketing Manager at Pro Manchester. And I'm delighted to welcome you to today's webinar, which is...
Oh, sorry, if I can just put yourselves on mute if you're not speaking, and then we can unmute, because I think there's a bit of interference there. If you put yourselves on mute, and then when we do come to questions, you can unmute yourself. That's great, thank you. Sorry, Sean, carry on.
No, not at all. So as I was saying, I'm the Events and Marketing Manager at Pro Manchester, and I'm delighted to welcome you to today's webinar, which is Unfurloughing Apprentices, and it's hosted by the Juice Academy. And I will pass you back over to Georgia Fitzgerald, the Associate Director at the Juice Academy in 1 second. Just wanted to signpost that following today's session, I'll send out a post-event email, which will contain any post-event collateral, links to where you can find out about other Pro Manchester events, and our new Pro Manchester YouTube channel, where you can view this and any other past webinars that you may be interested in or may have missed. Please hit the subscribe button while you're in there, and then you can stay up to date with our latest recordings as and when they become available. This email will also contain a feedback form, so if you could fill in the feedback form, it is really helpful to us at Pro Manchester to continue to improve our offerings and provide consistently great content, and it's also really helpful to Georgia as well, so we can get some feedback back to her. So anyway, without further ado, I will hand you back over to Georgia.
Brilliant, thanks Sean. Sean and Paul, if I can just ask you, do you mind putting yourselves on back on mute until we go to you, just like I say, to stop that background noise? And I'm just admitting another couple people from the waiting room. So yeah, as Sean said then, obviously the event is around unfurloughing apprentices. So I just wanted to give you a bit of an overview of the Juice Academy and sort of our experience since lockdown. For those of you who don't know, we're a digital marketing academy. We deliver the junior content production level 3 apprenticeship. And the way that our model works is that our partner company, Tangerine Communications, they look after big clients like Specsavers, Marks and Spencer's, Ideal Standard, and those industry professionals, they stop their day jobs and come down into the academy to deliver the training. And last year we partnered with Apprentify. They separately deliver a digital marketing level 3. SallyAnn will obviously introduce you, tell you a bit more about them in a minute. But together we deliver the junior content producer. So Apprentify look after all our development coaching. So employers have that sort of the support from both us as training providers. So we've currently got 30 apprentices in training at the moment, and I've got another about 20 that are going through their endpoint assessment, and about half of those are furloughed. Only 2 are on a break in learning, and so the absolute majority we've continued with the training remotely, and whilst they've been on furlough, and now we're starting to have those conversations with our employers about bringing them back into the workplace. And obviously by October they will all need to be back in the workplace and hopefully avoiding any redundancies. So what I'm going to do now is introduce you to the panelists, and they're just going to introduce themselves and explain sort of why they're here and what their sort of area is. So Paul, you're the next on my screen. If I can ask you to unmute yourself and introduce.
Hi everybody, great to be here. So I'm Paul Porter, I'm the Managing Director of Porter HR. So we are an outsourced HR consultancy for predominantly SMEs. So anything from, I don't know, sort of 15, 20 employees up to about 100, 150. So our experience over the last sort of 3 or 4 months, once we all worked out what actually furloughing people was, we started to look at our apprentices. So we work with clients across multiple sectors. So we've got 10 apprentices over 5 clients. Some of them were affected straight away because the guys who were in hospitality, we had to go straight into a furlough situation. And some people haven't been affected at all. So we've sort of continued their learning. They continue to work from home. So real kind of mixed bag in terms of how we've dealt with it. And on top of that, we work with multiple training providers. So hopefully today I'll be able to sort of answer some of the questions that you may have about what we've done, how we've sort of maintained contact and what our plans are to bring people back. But also then, not only how we've been managing the guys who have been working from home and haven't been in the workplace. So to sort of give you a bit of an overview in terms of what we've done. So that's a little bit about me.
Great, thanks, Paul. Kevin, if you can introduce yourself.
Thank you, Georgia, and hi everyone who's on the call. My name is Kevin McKenna. I am a solicitor and a partner at Kuits Solicitors, and I head up the employment law team there, which is a city centre commercial law practice, and like many people, we've been getting to grips with the legal issues in relation to furloughing and now taking people back off furlough, and all of the other legal issues that arise from that. So we'll talk more about that shortly. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Kevin. And SallyAnn.
Hi everybody, I'm SallyAnn from Apprentify. So as Georgia said, we are also a training provider. We partner with the Juice Academy to co-deliver with them their apprenticeship program, and we ourselves also specialise in digital marketing. We do the digital marketer level 3, junior content producer, and we also do marketing exec at level 4. We haven't been so affected in terms of delivery because we do majority of ours already online. But we've put in lots of good additional stuff over the period, working with SMEs of 8 to 10 people up to larger clients such as JD Sports who have thousands of people. So we can get into sort of added benefit and extra support and all the rest of it shortly. We now are in a phase where we have had, a bit like Paul said, some clients haven't been affected at all, others have furloughed. Some apprentices have also been put on a break in learning. So we're now really, as of this week, as of sort of a few last week, but most from the 1st of June, we have apprentices coming off furlough and back into the workplace now. And we're sort of looking at how best to support them with this.
That's great. Thanks, SallyAnn. So I think, Paul, if you don't mind, if we start with you, you know, maybe sort of discussing a couple of your experiences with the furloughed apprentices and your plans to unfurlough them with the different employers that you work with.
Yeah, so sorry, position it in very very politically correct here. So some of our training providers aren't as online as SallyAnn and the guys at Apprentify. So we initially did have a real challenge, to be honest, because it was very much a classroom kind of set up in terms of how our apprentices were learning. So once we got over the initial furloughing, getting the guys set up at home, there was a little bit of a gap, to be honest, with one or two of them, where I think the training providers just had to try and figure out what they're going to do, how they're going to adapt. But once that was done, it was very much about keeping in touch with them. I'm sure like everybody else has done with furloughed employees, and having the conversations around, you know, what does it mean? A couple of the guys that I'm thinking of straight away were in the hospitality sector. So people who are doing sort of their commis chef levels and their sort of front of house, which is a lot of it is they are learning on the job. They are actually doing the job day in, day out, and that was taken away. So we've adapted, we've changed. The plan for the guys, especially in the hospitality sector, once we have a bit of a clearer idea of when we can go back into operation, is that we'll bring them back and we'll reassess their learning in terms of where they are, what do they need to do, what are the gaps. And again, I suppose, you know, good practice, like we've done with everybody, is we're doing the risk assessments. Predominantly the people that we're talking to are young people. This is majority of them, it's their first job. So we're doing a little bit of extra care with them in terms of introducing them back into work, and just going through the plan in terms of where we are. And I'd say out of the 10 we've got, we furloughed 3. So we've also then got guys who've just been working from home. So a real balance in terms of where we're at. I think from my point of view, again, I think how the training delivery has been recently has been very, very good, and hopefully that will continue, because it certainly is sort of made things, the communication a lot better, because again, I suppose you've got a relationship with the line manager, and the line manager may be furloughed, so straight away you're then having the conversation with somebody else. So having the ability to jump on a Teams call, we can introduce people like the managing directors, the HR directors, we can get them involved, and people can actually get a good understanding. So I'm very optimistic that we'll get these guys back on track, and get them back to all the good work that was being done before March. So that's a bit of our overview.
And have you started working with the, have you been working with the employers at all regarding the risk assessments and the kind of health and safety aspects in terms of when bringing them unfurloughing the apprentices and other employees?
Yeah, I think everyone kind of shudders when you start seeing things like risk assessments and worry about things like that. But again, a lot of the stuff that we've been doing is making it very specific to the sites that they're going back onto. So they're all unique. There's some very generic and there's some very good guidelines out there. You know, that the government has put some really good guidelines out there. But I think what the approach needs to be is almost have an approach for all the employees, but then just review it again with the apprentices, because again, you don't assume that they know what works like. You know, they've been thrown into this. So we've been doing the risk assessments. We've been doing a lot of the communications with people in terms of, have they got any concerns? You know, what is the concern? Again, a lot of these people would be going through a process where, you know, they may have to get on public transport. They may not drive. You know, how do we get them into work? So we've been doing all that, and then once we've done the generic stuff, we then started to look at having individual consultations with people, setting out return to work plans, and again, it's just being transparent and open. That seems to be working really well with them.
Yeah, definitely. Well, as I mentioned before, it's a company to Tangerine. So what Tangerine did for this sort of 80 employees is the very sort of first starting point was that a survey for everyone on sort of returning to work. So including the furloughed people, but also including people who haven't been furloughed. But about that, like you said, then sort of transport and how that they feel about it. So it's having that communication and seeing how your employees and apprentices do feel about, you know, returning to work.
Yeah.
And I've got some more pointers on that to go through at the end when I discuss the guidelines that are a part of mine. So have you got any other anything else to add on that, Paul, in terms of your experiences and your plans to help support your employers bring the apprentices back?
Yeah, for me, I think it's very much about having a collaborative approach with everybody that's involved. You know, the apprentice, the training provider, the employee, and you know, the employer, and again, just really sort of like mapping it out with them in terms and being very open. You know, that we're all going through something totally new to us, and as long as we're transparent, we're open, and we try and get these guys back on track, and they understand. I think that's the only real advice I can give is, you know, just keep communicating with them, keep checking in, making sure they're okay. The training providers, to be fair, have been absolutely fantastic. So it's just something just dropped on them that they just had to adapt, and hopefully now that, you know, that's a potentially new way of working. So yeah, that's been our experience. I think we've also been mindful that we've got people who haven't been furloughed. I know today's about unfurloughing, but you know, apprentices who've been working from home, apprentices that haven't been in the workplace, and we've given them the same amount of care as the ones who have been furloughed, who haven't been working. You know, it's a bit of a unique situation for them to be learning and working and be sat at home, and you know, and keeping that going. So we've approached it almost with the same approach with everybody, really.
Okay, brilliant. And SallyAnn, can I ask you about your sort of experiences with employers? And I know you've actually had a couple come up being unfurloughed.
So building up on there, what was just said about the favourite one, the risk assessment and health and safety. Obviously, all the employers have their own risk assessment and their own health and safety policy. So we just want to make sure that, you know, COVID is obviously covered in that. From a practical perspective, it's the comms that go out to everyone in the business, and obviously not just the apprentices. So obviously there's going to be a very strict cleaning regime now in most offices. There won't be communal spaces for eating, you know, the shared kettle and any canteens and that kind of thing. So it's making sure that everybody is aware of it. From a development coach point of view, you know, where we're mindful that sometimes apprentices might come up with concerns they have about going back to work, differentiating the difference between the concerns and things necessarily been a safeguarding issue. obviously, the one big one, I think, is if there does happen to be somebody who then gets coronavirus in the office, that from our perspective and a training provider perspective, this isn't a safeguarding issue. This is something we would bring up with the management of that company, because there's a duty to report it, to do a read-or report, because then it has to be traced back. So, but that is the only thing in terms that we would be keeping an eye on. The contact with the apprentices has been ongoing, whether they've been furloughed or not. In many cases where we've had furloughed apprentices, their line manager has also been furloughed. So we have put on, in addition to the regular touch points that we would have, we have added things like free masterclasses. There were certain topics that came up. At the start of this process, we contacted all the employers and said, separate to the core of what we're teaching them, are there any other things you'd like us to explore that would help you when it comes to doing the rebuild and potential rebranding of a business? Some subject matters came up, hence then putting on masterclasses. We found to keep them engaged with their business whilst they've been studying on furlough, coming up, because we specialise in digital marketing, coming up with ideas to get the messages out there for the business post-COVID. Being in marketing, unlike other apprenticeships, it's lent itself. Comms are now incredibly important, so we've been able to build upon that. So apprentices still have the link, although they've been furloughed, with their actual business mentally, and in terms of driving that business forward. With line managers being furloughed, as Paul touched upon, we're now dealing with people in different areas of the business. They've been really supportive. Sometimes they haven't always been involved in apprenticeships. They're very keen to learn more, to support their apprentices. And now it's just a connection of joining the dots. Now that they're back in, it's possibly less about updating the apprentice, because they've been working flat out. It's being mindful to get those touch points back in with line managers to show them what the apprentices have been doing whilst on furlough and the strides that they've made and the gains, and then talk about them, embedding back in the workplace and how, if there's anything extra we can do to help them.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's really important about the communication and, being aware that the line manager who you do have contact with, usually they could be on furlough as well. And if I just want to open it up to sort of everyone in the room, if you've got any specific questions for Paul and SallyAnn about, their experiences or their sort of plans to support the employers and the apprentices back into the workplace. Or if you want to tell us about, your current experience or where you're sort of at in the stages of unfurloughing an apprentice. You got any questions for them at all? I think if I sort of bring to the table, again, going back to Tangerine, what we've done, there's some really brilliant resources that we've been using off Bright HR. So the initial was, like I said to you before, that survey of getting other people's opinions and how they feel about returning to work, and things like that. And the next one is the risk assessment. So like SallyAnn said, all the perceived risks in your office, the communal areas, the toilets, smoking areas, all different things like this. And then out of that, you can create an educational piece on returning to work. So you're making sure that you are educating your employees and apprentices about the new regulations and policies. So I'm going to pass you over to Kevin. Kevin, I think if you wanted to sort of say a few points of, top legal points to consider before we open it up to questions.
Sure, thank you. Okay, so I'm just going to, I suppose, throw out a few legal issues that might be relevant to either the apprentice or training organisations or employers that arise as a result of this. And so if I start with the issue of notice when you're bringing someone back from furlough. For anyone that's dealt with anyone being placed on furlough, you'll recall that this is all consensual. you can only place somebody on furlough with their consent. It has to be done as an agreed variation. There was some confusion at the outset as to what the mechanics of that were and whether or not you needed to have written that evidenced in writing, and issues like that have been clarified over time. But one thing that is pretty certain is that at the very beginning of the job retention, the coronavirus job retention scheme, lots of organisations were speedily putting together consent documents, sometimes without the benefit of detailed guidance, and certainly without the benefit of what came later, which was a Treasury direction talking about the mechanics of that. So when you need to bring somebody back from furlough, it's important that you look at what agreement you put in place with them when they were placed on furlough. So you might have put something in about notice provisions. You might not have put anything in about notice provisions at all, but things like how much notice someone will require in order to return back to their job, it needs to be resolved and can be a touch point. So first of all, you should look at those documents, look at what you said. The law, if it has to fill in the gaps for you, will say that you should again try and agree that, and that the party should act reasonably. That will take into account, or ought to take into account, the circumstances of the individual who is being brought back from furlough. You should also then look at issues around the selection of people who are brought back from furlough, not just on the basis of whether or not someone is an apprentice or not, but if you're bringing certain apprentices back and not others, then sometimes that can create areas of dispute, of concerns as to whether or not there is any discrimination at play as to why one apprentice is brought back over another. So it's an important consideration that you've got some structure to your reasoning, and you can justify as the employer the reasoning, and that maybe you can explain to other apprentices who aren't being brought back what your reasoning is for not bringing them back, because that can resolve lots of disputes. So that involves keeping in touch with apprentices, whether they remain on furlough or whether you are in the process of bringing them back. You probably need to be extra sensitive to some of the reasons that people might have for not coming back from furlough or rejecting the request to return to work. Because there are people who will be in the extremely vulnerable categories. There might be people with childcare responsibilities. There will be people, no doubt, who will have concerns over the health and safety provision if returning to work means returning to a workplace. In fact, there may be health and safety issues if returning to work means returning to duties from home, where you can still have obligations as an employer to provide a safe system of work for your employees. There is legal protection in place for employees who raise issues in relation to health and safety. Two particular sections that are in some, what is, I guess, now older legislation, but the 1996 Employment Rights Act wasn't drafted with a pandemic in mind, but it provides protection to employees if they are dismissed for raising issues of health and safety. That's under Section 100, and under Section 44 if they suffer any detriment because of raising issues in relation to health and safety. And employers need to be concerned about that, because not only could they face claims in relation to dismissal or detriment, but that could place somebody in the position of being a whistleblower, and that gives employees protection. One factor, I suppose, that anyone who is being furloughed needs to consider, and apprentices no less than anyone else would have to consider, that given the general economic factors, it's likely to place you at a greater degree of risk of redundancy. You may find as an apprentice you haven't got the length of service that would entitle you to redundancy payments. You may find if you've got less than 2 years service, which may frequently be the case, that you don't have automatic protection against being unfairly dismissed. So I know in our pre-discussions it's something that SallyAnn made, which is the importance for apprentices to demonstrate their value to a business, because whilst you might be vulnerable to redundancy on the one hand, because of your length of service and possibly because of inexperience, on the other hand, you may be the sort of worker who has a demonstrable aptitude for learning. You may have skills that are going to be useful, or are developing skills that are going to be useful in the economy as it develops, in perhaps a more technology-based delivery of services and so on. So it's really important, I suppose. And if you are an apprentice that finds yourself in that situation, and you have an employer that is selecting people for redundancy and is consulting about that, then I think if I was an apprentice, I would be saying, well, one of the selection criteria I would invite you to use is something like somebody's aptitude for learning, somebody's skills development and so on, that actually might put you in a stronger position of escaping potential dismissal. There is since Rishi Sunak's announcement on Friday, there's also the consideration of ensuring that if you hit the deadline now for being put on furlough, if you want to be brought back off furlough in the future. So the deadline for the closure of that scheme is the 10th of June, so not very long away. So if you want to have that flexibility, then you need to take account of that. And that announcement, of course, also means that where there is furloughing, there is the opportunity to bring people back part-time. So it's also, I suppose, something that might work quite flexibly for the benefit of apprentices.
I just wanted to say on that point, Kevin, because obviously for a lot, that will be something that they need to discuss separately with the training provider, because there is a minimum amount of hours for a lot of qualifications that need to be done. So whilst it's quite a good option for other employees, it might not be possible for apprentices. So obviously, if that is being considered for apprentices, then to talk to the training provider directly about that one.
Yeah.
How many hours they need to be contracted to do.
And it can only be done with consent in any event. So in order to qualify under the scheme, and in order to not offend any contractual principles, then if you found yourself being asked to return for work at a level which didn't suit you for various other reasons, then that's a factor to be borne in mind. That's consensual, and it should again be, well, the current guidance or the current press release indicates that should be agreed in writing, although whether or not that will become necessary, that's subject to change, because there was a change about that in relation to putting people on furlough in the first place, where it was said that had to be evidenced in writing, and that's actually now no longer the case. I guess you will all be aware of making sure that when people are on furlough and being brought back from furlough, of the impact in terms of national minimum wage provision. If you are an apprentice on furlough but not carrying out training, then national minimum wage provisions don't apply. If you are doing training, national minimum wage provisions do apply. When you return back, then your normal wages will apply. Again, of course, though, subject to making sure that that's above the national minimum, on or above the national minimum wage. I think for now, probably those are the main points that I just wanted to highlight. But as George has said, I'm happy to answer any questions that people might have.
Yeah, and if I, even if it's a sector-specific question that you have for Kevin, in relation to anything, then please unmute yourself and ask away. I'll just leave it there for a minute for people to do that. Do you have any questions for Kevin at all? No? Anything to do with specifically with your sector, or whether you're training provider or employer, and considering any legalities? Okay. So I just wanted to share some slides with you. Paula Ackers from the Growth company was going to join us today on the panel, but she couldn't, unfortunately. So the Growth company and the Greater Manchester Combined Authority have a project that's been going on for the last couple of years now, called the Cedar Project. And they're actually pulling together a guide with help from employers that they work with, all around unfurloughing apprentices. So we were hoping that would actually be ready, the full guide to share with you now, but it's not quite there yet, but we can share that with the full attendee list once that is available. But for now, they've got some key points which I can share with you. So I'm just going to share my screen and then I can bring them up. So the Cedar Project is stimulating employer demand for apprenticeships. So they work with lots of different companies across the GM to raise the profile of apprenticeships and help them determine what types of apprenticeships and training providers that they could be working with. So to the date, they've engaged with 2,000 small to medium enterprises over 18 months and generated 600 new apprenticeship starts. So I'm just going to sort of like take you through these. These are the key points that are going to be in the main guides. So how does an employer unfurlough an employee or apprentice correctly? So employers should unfurlough employees and apprentices in the same way that they would decide to place them on furlough. So decisions should be made on an objective criterion. Using objective criteria will lessen the chance of discrimination becoming apparent, choosing to unfurlough or keep the employee or apprentice on the scheme. So a plan should be created of who and why the reasoning behind the need to unfurlough these apprentices or employees are selected. This should be set out in writing to each affected employee. If the unfurlough is temporary, again, stating why this is the case and how long this is likely to be for. So in selecting whether to unfurlough an employee or apprentice, numerous factors should be taken into account. And here are some suggestions on how to select which employees are unfurloughed. Taking into account the length of time that they have actually been on furlough for. Check agreements made with employees regarding furlough. It's advised that the employers revisit the written agreement, this is what Kevin was mentioning, that was made when they were furloughed. So it's important to establish whether employees are entitled to any notice when they're expected to return to work for. Asking those employees who have expressed interest that they would like to return to work. And base those decisions on the skills that are required to undertake work, so sufficient role scope. So further considerations, has a skills matrix, a risk assessment and a role scope been performed? So it's preferable that these assessments are carried out to ensure that people with the most appropriate skills are returning to work and in an order that supports these people's skills. So as a result of new working guidelines, some rules will change, business models altered and processes changed to accommodate diversification. So apprentices must need to be put back into appropriate roles, not just used as temporary staff. So that's important to consider when bringing them back. Are they still able to develop their skills, knowledge and behaviours that's on the apprenticeship standard or qualification that they're doing? So employee or apprentice personal circumstances, again, Kevin mentioned that before. It's really important to think about, are they caring as children or any of their personal circumstances that they deem vulnerable to the virus? So when unfurloughing, will they be coming back to the same job? Is it appropriate to the length of their programme and the programme of study that they're on? Will the learner be able to satisfy the core elements of their apprenticeship? Will they also be able to appropriately satisfy the off-the-job requirements in changes to the role that have been made? And also consider mental health and support for the employees and apprentices. So conduct wellbeing risk assessments and offer support and training for their mental health and wellbeing. it's a worrying time for everyone, and communication is key to the transition back. And you want them to feel like that your workforce, like you as the employers, care, and so they will be mentally more resilient. And finally, should apprentices remain on furlough until other workforces have returned to work? You need to take in consideration is the leadership, support and mentors sufficiently in place to support return. As SallyAnn mentioned before, many of the line managers that we're usually speaking to have been furloughed themselves. So as an employee, you need to make sure that that support system is there for the apprentice. The return is likely to be busy, and many employers have chosen to return apprentices only once the rest of the workforce have returned and tried and tested the new working environment and new processes and regulations. So this ensures a smooth and less chaotic and reassuring return for an apprentice, and it ensures that the mentors have capacities to support their return. And reduced hours of working, this is again something that Kevin mentioned. So, again, have that separate conversation with the training provider, because there might be some contractual and learning program implications that means that they can't do reduced hours that might be right for other employers. So I'm going to stop sharing those, and like I said, I'm going to send out these resources. So I'll send out some examples of the risk assessment and the e-learning for returning to work, and I will share the CEDAR slides, but when they actually have the proper guide together, I can share that as well with the attendee list. Could I open up to the audience or panelists if anyone else wants to make some last remarks, comments, or if we do have any questions from the attendees? Any concluding remarks from our panelists? SallyAnn, actually, one of my questions was more to you, I suppose, on what support can we provide as training providers? What support should we be doing with the employers in terms of ensuring that the apprentices are embedding and developing the skills that we've been continuing to train throughout furlough period?
It's funny, I was just about to ask everybody, did they have any requests from a training provider? Right. As I mentioned earlier, and in fact Kevin touched upon it as well, one of the things we've done during the lockdown period is put in a fair bit of additionality to the core programme. And it was born out of a genuine desire to help people in this time. And we said, the business is not going to be the same when you go back in for different reasons. And there'll be different folks. It's not all negative. There'll just be maybe a shift in focus to different areas of the business, or perhaps their market share or the clients that they're approaching. So because we're in digital marketing, we have been working with apprentices to get their ideas on how to go about this rebuild and to align it with what they need to study. And we've also spoken to different people in their organisation saying, is there something we can work on specifically with you? And so there's been a real focus on things like advertising campaigns and looking at websites and analysing data and all the good things that one would expect to see in a digital marketing programme. But joined up with the fact that we're very conscious that apprentices going back into the workplace want to go back in that slightly unsafe, vulnerable world, showing ideas they've had of how to drive their organisation forward post-lockdown, and so show their, I suppose, put blunt value and show their worth and their ability to come up with things and be part of a future. So we've really helped with that. The development coaches have almost doubled their contact points with the apprentices in their efforts to do this. As I mentioned, we've put on the masterclasses. We've also spoken, I've spoken to employers an awful lot more than I would normally do about ideas. And there's been some fantastic brainstorming. We've had a number of clients come back with great ideas and lots of lateral thinking. So I suppose from a training provider perspective, we're very open to helping. We'll often point people in a direction, but then it's amazing what comes out of it. And one of the things I would like perhaps to ask the guests is, is there anything that you would like to see more of from a training provider? You know, I can point to the things that we've done, but I'm not in your shoes. Is there something that any of you feel you'd like to see more of, or that you would challenge us on that we could do better, or any other way we could help you? Obviously not.
No,
if no one's brave enough, SallyAnn, I'll come in from an employer's point of view. I think having worked with different training providers before this and actually through the process, I think one of the things that has really worked well is once people have kind of worked out what we're doing, is that sort of like a multi-way communication. So from someone like me, I'm not necessarily always on site with clients and around the apprentices, but you know, to be able to jump on a Teams call or a Zoom, get the apprentice on there, get the training provider on there, get the their line manager, and have a very quick call, I think has been massively beneficial, and maybe something that we kind of knew it was going on in the background and we were interested in it, and we touched base every now and again, but because it was the ease of communication made it available, we could do it any time. So I think that really has worked. I know you guys do a lot of stuff online. I think from the employer's point of view, who they're always, especially in the SME market, that time's the biggest issue that they have. They just don't have any. So I think that's really worked well. And I think also we've probably, again, working with different providers, we've seen that people have gone to very much a more online process, and I think there's massive benefits to move forward and be able to have the apprenticeships go out to a wider audience than probably necessary before.
Yeah, I think so. We made a decision a couple of years ago to do our classroom element, if you like, online. We use Adobe Connect, and it's live. And the great thing about Adobe Connect is it also has breakout rooms and things in it. So it's very engaging as a platform. Obviously, when this came along, the fact that that was already in situ and had been working well for quite some time was the real boon. And the only thing we had to change was the part that we normally do in the workplace, so the coaching and the performance reviews, which people could pick a platform. So it was whether they wanted it on Zoom or Microsoft Teams, or we'd set it up with Adobe. We've had people say, no, can we use it as Google Hangouts? We've had some people saying, can I just go on my WhatsApp and I'll FaceTime you? It's been a real mix. Certainly technology has been a big help. And we were uniquely placed. Not everyone else is. I think, Georgia, you can testify that the Juice Academy is famous for the fact that they get everyone physically together in the centre of Manchester. It's one of their biggest USPs, I'd say. Yeah. And we all get together in a room and thrash everything out together. And then Georgia overnight found herself having to go fully online, and there was that process. Fortunately, Juice Academy turned that around. I think it was in the space of a week. Everything was up and running. I think certain people were able to run with it quicker. We've seen the same with, we had some companies who still needed to interview. They still wanted to take on apprentices in this period, in this lockdown period. Not everybody had Zoom accounts and everything else. So we facilitated that. We said, well, we've got those. So if you want to do an interview, we'll send you a link. We'll open it. We'll then back off and get out of the meeting and leave you to it. And it was just making people aware. We've sat on forums where there've been other training providers involved and answered questions on doing online. But I think in terms of openness, we've had clients say, for years I've been trying to get people to hold remote meetings, not always travel. Now they've been forced to. People have suddenly realized that it was nothing to perhaps be afraid of or to worry about. It's actually a really efficient way to do business. So there's been a lot of positives from a digital perspective come out of this, I think. But perhaps, Georgia, you're better talking about how, because you had to do that transformational piece. You had to make the change.
Yeah, well, I mean, because we've been sort of, considering how we can work with employers further afield for, years now. Really, but we always sort of came back to it being location restricted because of the fact that we have to have the apprentices come to the classroom to deliver the training there. Like you said, SallyAnn, that's like, sort of our USP. So it is funny kind of what you figure out that you can do when you have to. So it, like you said, it was within a week that we went to delivering digitally. But we're looking forward to going back into the academy for those more practical aspects, the videography, the photography. But it's just been fantastic to see how, you know, the tutors have adapted and been able to deliver everything else through online. I just wanted to pick up on something you said before as well about how you've been speaking to the employers more. I think, you know, employers have hopefully, everyone here on the call have hopefully been touching base a lot more with their training provider, and expect to do so more so when the apprentices are becoming unfurloughed. You know, the development coaches should be working with, you know, closely with you and the apprentices to make sure that any training that they have been delivering over the weeks of lockdown, the apprentice is still going to get the opportunity to develop those skills in the workplace. So, you know, really make sure that you are having those conversations with the training providers to make sure that the apprentice isn't going to miss out on having any of those skills developed. Has anyone else on the panel got anything to add, or again, to our shy audience, opening it up if anyone wants to ask a couple of final questions or just remarks at all? No problem at all. Well, we have finished a bit earlier because we were hoping for more questions, I suppose. But like I say, I will be sending the resources, some templates for sort of risk assessment and e-learning, as well as the slides on the key guide from the CEDA, and we will share that report with you once they've pulled that together. So thank you everyone for joining us this afternoon, and hopefully you can enjoy the sun this evening, because I think it's going to be the last day of sun for a while, unfortunately. So enjoy the sun, and thanks again, and thank you panelists.
Thank you.
All right, bye now everyone.
Bye.
Goodbye.
Bye. Take care.